This is a recording of an X Space hosted by Her Majesty Queen Bee and your Uncle Owl. To join these spaces every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern, check the show notes for details.
Do you guys want to introduce yourselves to everybody first?
Sure. I can let Jonathan, you can go first.
Sure. I'm Jonathan Prescott, and
I'm Adriana Prescott.
And we are the authors of a book called Kids Don't Need School, a radical new homeschool plan to teach anything, promote independent learning, and prepare children for an uncertain future. And that's who we are. We also do coaching for homeschooling families who want to transition into homeschooling or have any other questions. We've been outspoken on vouchers. My first time I was outspoken on vouchers was back in the early 90s. I'm a Gen Xer. My wife is Gen Xer. We're both engineers by trade, electrical engineers. I'm retired after 30 years, and my wife is still working in that field. And she homeschooled our daughter for a while, and then we traded places, and I started homeschooling our daughter.
But she most likely homeschooled herself by then, so
yes,
as most kids do when they're homeschooled.
And she started college at 14, so homeschooling works.
Yeah, nice to meet y'all. Hear a little bit about your story. So I'm the CEO of Classical Conversations, which was started in my family's basement in 1997. I like to claim Gen X, but sometimes I fall in the millennial group, so sometimes I'm a Zennial. But I was homeschooled the whole way through high school, got an industrial engineering from Clemson University, did the quote-unquote real-world thing for about 6 years, working at some Fortune 50 companies and a small manufacturing company before coming and helping other people homeschool. And so Classical Conversations helps about 45,000 families around the globe. We're in 60 countries. Homeschool classically with a biblical worldview and inside a local community that meets typically once a week with a trained parent tutor. And so I've been speaking out and trying to raise awareness on why school choice isn't all it's been cracked up to be now for the last couple of years. And I have 3 kids that I'm homeschooling. My wife and I are homeschooling now, 10, 8, and 4.5.
That is excellent, and I do believe my microphone is working now, so good to see everybody.
Nice. And Uncle Owl, do you want to introduce yourself?
Uncle Owl, I am I've been a teacher. I taught middle school, 7th grade. I have been involved in academics since after high school for about 17 and a half years at the college level. I was on the 17 and a half year track and I barely made it. And I've studied everything from biomedical sciences and biology, biochemistry, to neuroscience and psychology and clinical psychology, some philosophy and some education. My wife is a kindergarten teacher, and we have 2 girls. And we currently are we're a, what do you want to call it, a double agent in enemy territory. And my wife and I have been making plans to get our kids home for homeschooling, but our kids are still pretty young, and they go to a really good school that my wife is a kindergarten teacher at, and we've been happy with that, and probably will. We were planning on moving our kids out into homeschooling within a few years, and I think that's been moved up pretty solidly to not that long at all. But I bumped into Bowtied Queen Bee, and she has been a let's call it a fire starter. So we've been enjoying taking care of the bigger and cooler aspects of getting people into homeschooling. And of course, my wife and I we use the homeschooling principles with our kids all the time, and especially over the summers and since they've been pretty young. But now that they're old enough, we're getting down to the nitty gritty about getting them into homeschooling and connected to families that are homeschooling. And my experience mostly has been as a teacher and in academics and in helping students from especially high school level and through college. And I see so much of what is wrong with the older level of students, going wrong with the older level of students that could have been fixed when they were in the younger years. And so that's pretty important to me to have now spent time in, what do you want to call it, the federal system, and realized that they do not address these things properly. And to see it so very viscerally was really helpful to me. And so we'll take it to our host, Her Majesty, the Queen Bee.
Hey, so I Bowtie Queen Bee. I started these spaces kind of just on a whim one Wednesday because my kids were at youth group and I had nothing better to do. And I've run into a lot of cool people since doing them, including Uncle Owl, who is now we have quite a little thing going. I was homeschooled. My parents started homeschooling me in the mid 80s, which I realize gives away my age. I'm also a zillennial or whatever they call it, exennial. Um, my I was I was homeschooled. I went to public school. I went to private school, and then I was homeschooled again. So I've just kind of my parents gave me a lot of free reign. Gave all of me and my siblings free reign over what our education was going to look like. So yeah, and I've been homeschooling my kids. I have one in high school and 3 in middle school, and I've been homeschooling them since they were born. So that's where we're at. So today I was thinking we should talk about school choice because it is quite a hot topic, and I thought that the 2 best people are probably the 2 most outspoken people I've seen on it, which are Jonathan and Robert. And so yeah, I'm excited about this. I am going to have, normally in these spaces I just let everyone speak and it's not a big deal, but I think we're going to have a bit more of a structured discussion this time. So if you do want to speak, please request. But for the most part, I'm going to let Robert and Jonathan and Uncle Owl kind of take a lot of lead in this. So I'll turn it back over to you, Uncle Owl.
Yeah, so this evening we have with us these 2 incredible people, and 3, and they're gonna check in with us about this topic that is everywhere. I think it's been getting a lot more buzz recently, and one of our favorite things that we've started this year, which we started on the very first of the year, which was a Wednesday, is we're spending some time reviewing some of the major, what I call them, homeschooling excuses / myths, because they tend to be the first layer of excuse to not take thinking about homeschooling seriously, but they're actually for the wrong reason, because those excuses in particular don't hold any water and actually aren't that big of a deal, when there are far more important things to think about, that should require your time and energy, as parents, to think about what to do with our kids and their schooling. Those myths so far were socialization, and we're also going to discuss curriculum. But before we went and changed to curriculum, we thought we would discuss this because Robert Bortins and the Prescotts definitely have some excellent things to say concerning, so what's up with school choice? Like, why is that described as being a benefit or better? And maybe there was a point at which it was better than some options, but why is it, especially in its current instantiation, why is it just not what people think it is, not the freedom and not the solution that it's described as being?
Yeah, so I just first of all, to kind of define our terms, when we're talking about school choice today, we're talking mostly about universal vouchers and universal ESAs, where the government takes money and tax money and then allocates it into bank accounts or into funds that are then that are used then to pay for private schools or homeschooling or private education. choices. We're not talking about charter schools. We're not talking about, hey, I don't like high school A in my district. Can I go to high school B in my district? And we're not talking about, really like individuals who have special, learning cases or disabilities, those type of things. Our discussion on school choice centers around these bills. You can see them in Texas and Tennessee are kind of the two big ones. Florida and Arizona have passed some. So it's that's what we're talking about when we're talking about school choice. It's not that I like to say I'm 100% for school choice and 0% for the government paying for that choice. And so parents in all 50 states already can homeschool. They can already send their kids to private school. These things are already accessible. There's scholarships for low-income families. There's scholarships for homeschoolers and private schools, in all sorts of different ways that people make it work. And so that's what we're talking about today specifically when we're referring to school choice. So, Jonathan, you want to chime in on that?
Sure. I I found it interesting that during the pandemic, the beginning of the pandemic, when the schools closed and everything, why they started rolling out school vouchers again, because that was mostly a dead issue been in the early 90s with Newt Gingrich. And it was a bit odd to me as I was seeing, because I was on Twitter then, now it's X, but I saw, it's like, why are they talking about vouchers now? And Corey DeAngelis was one of the champions, and he started gaining prominence in this. At first, he started talking about how wonderful homeschooling is, and then he started talking about school choice, and it was just odd to me that they were rolling that out. And so it seemed like homeschooling was the real movement. That the pandemic started the homeschooling movement, and then the opposition became the astroturfed version of school choice. And of course, with the slogans they came out with of money following the student and that sort of thing. And I just found it odd that was happening. And I started looking into this, because I know that vouchers in some form have been floated and tried since even the late 1800s, I believe, but not really in any big modern way as far as the 1990s. And so one of the things that happened back then with vouchers, and what killed it, is the idea of the money, the government money being used to tell religious schools who they can hire for teachers, and using the intercommerce clauses for hiring practices and stuff like this. So a lot of Christian schools said, we don't want to hire atheists or whoever, people who don't follow their values. And so that's one of the reasons that school choice back then ended. And so the arguments have changed little, even though now they have kind of a globalist tint to them, with UNESCO coming in, and their version of what they call vouchers is a demand side financing. And so that's in the UNESCO documents and stuff like this. So anyway, I just want to give you a little background on that. Anything else to add, Robert?
Yeah, so in the early 90s, while it was being rejected here in the United States, it was quickly passed in the country of Sweden. And Sweden, of course, is a European country, and it was the conservatives at that moment that were in charge, and it's part of this idea on equity that the E in the DEI, and the idea that, hey, if we give, we're spending $12,000 a year or $18,000 a year or whatever it is in public school. Well, what if we give parents and children money to go to the private school of their choice? And so Sweden did this, and within 19 years after adopting it by a conservative government, the socialists became in charge. They made it so that every single school had to take, the end of grade tests that the socialist government chose. They had to do the socialist academic program. So yeah, you could be a Christian teacher, but you had to teach that, the Bible teaches Marxism, and that, boys can use girls' bathrooms, and ESG and climate change and all those sorts of things that are controversial, or reasons that people might want to choose a different school. And they actually outlawed private payments for education services, because they're saying, well, everyone's getting this voucher, so there's no reason for a private school to charge more than the voucher, which funny enough, it took Sweden 14 years, I believe, from passing the original school choice bill to eliminating private payments for education. Well, I mentioned earlier that Florida is one of these states that passed school choice, I think, 2 years ago, and that's been where they, give money to parents that can use it for funds. And this year, right now, in the Florida legislators, I just saw this bill yesterday, so I haven't done a lot of research on its possibility of passing, or, what side implemented it or not. But one of the things that we do at Classical Conversation is we have concurrent enrollment. So our sophomore, juniors, and seniors can earn college credit while they're taking our programs. And our partner university is a private university in Florida. Well, because they're in Florida and there's these school choice bills that are paying, for these funds, the Florida legislators have a bill right now that outlaws funds, private payments to universities for concurrent enrollments. So what the socialists did in Sweden over a 10 to 14 year period, conservatives in Florida could do in just back-to-back legislative sessions. And so this isn't actually, as Jonathan kind of alluded to, this isn't a conservative, it's not out of a conservative think tank. This was originally in the early 1970s out of Cal Berkeley, the communist teachers university there, came up with this idea that if they can get vouchers adopted in the private schools, that they could eventually, over a series of years, force the schools to adopt their worldview. And then the United Nations and UNESCO, their education group, picked up this idea. And then they found that Republicans were willing to run with it. So, you might say, why are the Republicans, doing this idea? Well, the globalists don't care which party passes their globalist agenda, because they know they can look into the future and see what the actual results are, because they've already run this school choice dependency trap in other countries, and they know that it works.
That's the step up for students in Florida, isn't it? That started by John Kirkley in 2002.
Well, they've got they have
several.
So they passed a new one. I think in 2023 or 2022, they passed an expanded version of school choice that is eligible for for more groups.
They nickname them scholarships rather than vouchers.
Yes. So each state has different versions of them. They'll called ESAs or vouchers, and they all have different mechanisms that they put in place and different strings attached or no strings attached. Arizona was the first big state that in the last few years passed school choice, and it's been called the gold standard of school choice laws. The Heritage Foundation, which I've worked with in a number of areas, I vehemently disagree with them on school choice. They're at least honest enough to publish an article yesterday that showed nearly 2/3 of voucher participants in Arizona are unsatisfied with the program. And so they've, almost immediately attached strings after not passing any strings in the original bill. And, now people are starting to feel the pinch just, 3 years later. These are not, people say these are slippery slope arguments, Robert. And I say, well, if I've seen 10 people in a row fall down this hill, it's not a slippery slope, it's a trap. And that's
Right.
absolutely what these bills are doing.
And some of those strings, like Governor Katie Hobbs, has proposed reforms to increase oversight, including requiring a public school history of 100 days for new applicants, manual review of purchases over $500, enhancing transparency and accountability on how funds are spent. The system that Arizona has is what they call Class Wallet, and it's a platform where parents can use a prepaid debit card to request or make direct payments to vendors or schools, and receipts and invoices are required for accountability. Now, whenever the government says accountability, it's never accountability for themselves. It's always for the accountability of the people. And so the other thing about the Class Wallet, it's a financial vendor that's used for managing ESA accounts. Is a private equity firm with investors like Guidepost Growth Equity and Bruton Global. So whenever we talk about school choice, right in the back door we have things like venture capitalists and things that we don't even realize. I mean, a prepaid debit card. Let's look at that bureaucracy behind that. When real homeschooling, it's just the parents and the child.
It's just family and the resources around them.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, so a couple of things. Yeah, you'll hear things like, well, the money's going to follow the child. And that sounds good. They say fund students, not systems. But what they're really doing is sucking these private schools and homeschoolers back into their system, because the system isn't the public school building or the public school curriculum. It's the public school funding. It's the redistribution of wealth from taxpayers to individuals. And, hats off to the Tennessee legislators who wrote their school choice bill, which is pretty much the worst school choice bill I've ever read. Even if I was for school choice, I'd be against this Tennessee bill. But they at least call it what it is, which is an entitlement program. And so the only thing that's going to be following the child is the data mining. It's going to be the dependency on the government. It's going to, really make it so, the cost of education is going to go up while the quality goes down, because anyone who's ever seen the government get involved in a, transaction, whether it's medical, college classes, college courses and payments, there's only one thing that ever happens. Price goes up, quality goes down. I mean, it's it should be a scientific law that Newton discovered at this point. So so these catchphrases that they've established, they're catchy, they're cool. They probably spent hundreds of $1,000s on marketing firms and groups to try to figure out what's going to win people over. But when you start really breaking down some of these different ideas that you hear out there, you can really see the globalist agenda and the strings that are quickly going to be attached to these that will make it so, yeah, maybe a couple kids now get a better education than they would have, but our grandchildren will have no choice at all because of the dependency that these programs will put into the private education system. So, Jonathan,
And you just said one of the key catchphrases that I thought we should spend a little time just walking around. I know you've mentioned a few of them, like the money follows the child. One of them is no strings attached, and to me, it's not just it sounds so good that it couldn't possibly be true. It's we're not actually that dumb to think that there are no strings attached. Like in what way are you watching the strings being attached? I think it was what you just described a moment ago, that it's not that the vouchers are being used to fund the students in any capacity, whether or not they're in a public or government education versus a homeschooler. It's actually to bring those students who are in alternative ways of being educated underneath the premise of the funding, because the funding comes with some obvious strings attached. I figured we should spend some time chatting about that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So one,
Sorry about that. Hold on just a second. Robert, I think I just invited you to speak. Sorry about that. Hold on.
Stand by. While she's fixing that, Robert, you just cut me off in chat as soon as you're free to do so. I have always thought that it would be so important to indicate for everyone that the goal of government education is not the education of students. The bullseye on the target of government education is to satisfy the bureaucratic paperwork needed to approve funding. And I was completely convinced of that after I spent time understanding the data to unpack what it is our schools spend their time doing, what it is our teachers spend their time doing, how they prove that they're doing their job effectively. And it has everything to do with the bureaucratic paperwork necessary to approve funding. And that's why they're so good at it. And the bullseye on the target is not the successful education of students. And that's why they're not very good at it. I'll say some more about that in a moment. I will give Robert a chance to hop up when he can. But Jonathan, did you want to add something to that?
Yes, it's actually quite interesting that when you take a deep dive into the history of why we have compulsory education in this country, and but I won't go into that specifically. What I do want to say is the pandemic again started a homeschooling movement, and we went from very very few homeschoolers to 5 million homeschoolers in a very short time. And so that was 10% of all K through 12 population. And so the public schools, the government school system panicked because they justified their budgets by head count. And they can't have everybody, leaving the schools at once, because then what if the schools aren't populated? What's the justification for property tax? And so then you ask the question, what are we going to leave the tax plantation? Can we make a bid now to end property tax because it's no longer needed? Of course, property taxes, pay for a few other things, but the majority of all property tax goes for education. And so it threatened the system. Mass homeschooling threatened the system. And I want to use that threat to have more mass homeschooling, because then we can finally, hopefully, eliminate property tax to where we actually own our properties again.
Yeah, and that I think that was brought in as part of the Trojan horse of the school choice, that within school choice was aimed at that very thing. Robert, looks like you're able to speak. You can go right ahead, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the property tax issue is a big one. Most people don't realize between about 50 to 60% of your state taxes that are collected are going into education. And so it is a big boom on the budget. And obviously, if everyone started homeschooling or sending their kids to private school today, our tax bills could be cut in half, and we'd all have significantly more resources to use on our family, and to be generous with scholarships and helping those less fortunate than us, and all of those things. But yeah, so the money is what it is. You always say follow the money, and that's why you can see what's really going on. And so none of these school choice bills that have been passed have made government smaller. It's all making it bigger. One, by budgets, because you have roughly 10% of people prior to school choice were paying their own education bills. And so those 10% of people have to be added onto the government entitlement rolls first before, and then you have to get enough people out of public school to offset that change. But in states, the thing with private schools is they're mostly filled up. So it's not a matter of, people don't have funds and these schools are sitting empty. It's really that the capacity is filled up. And so, like in the state of Tennessee, I think someone did research, there's only 500 seats available in all of the private schools in the entire state. And 60% of counties in Tennessee don't even have a private school. And so when they are saying that we're going to do the school choice bill and give, scholarships to 10,000 students, well, it's just a farce, because there's only 500 seats in capacity for the system. And so the only thing that's going to be following the children is inflation, because it is demand side economics. It's not free market society. It's not a free market choice. It's actually what's called a quasi market. And quasi markets do not work well. They've been tried in a number of areas. And the research just shows that the results are abysmal. And so,
yeah,
like
that's
I said,
one of the other major talking points, right? Like the buzzwords for the school choice is it's a free market solution. Like in what ways is that just so obviously not the case?
Right. I've never heard of a free market where the government is providing the funds into the system. And of course, if the money follows the students, then that's making the system part of that. And yeah, it's just so it's so dishonest on its face that that's one of the things that I keep almost like crying over, is like, if this is what our think tanks think our free market on the conservative side, places like Heritage Foundation and FEE and Americans for Prosperity, or whatever favorite one is pushing this junk, it's like, how are you a conservative think tank when you don't even know what a free market is? And then they say things like, well, it's going to add competition to the public schools. And then to me, it's like, okay, well, let's look at this bill in Tennessee as an example, because it's a great one. They're actually going to double fund the students. So not only is the public school going to get the same funding as if the student attended, even though they're not attending, then the student's going to get paid. So you're going to double the cost of everything, every single student. They're giving a $2,000 bonus to every teacher in the state. Now, some of those teachers probably deserve more than that, and some of them probably don't deserve anything. but $2,000, and they're increasing the building funds for each of the public schools to improve them. So, I mean, even if you were to say, how is this going to be a competitive market when you're increasing funding for one system and double funding it? I mean, it's just ridiculous. They did the same thing in Arizona. I mean, they add hundreds of millions or dollars to the public school coffers. And people are like, well, I'd rather these parents have it than the public school. It's like, well, that's not the bills that they're passing. They're passing bills that give the public school more money and these people money, but all it's going to do is drive up costs because now you've got all this money floating in the system. I mean, I thought we kind of learned that lesson with our COVID dollars and all these different programs that, if you give people free money, that makes them happy and also drives inflation. And so we're seeing, like in Florida, we're seeing inflation. Iowa was another bill that they passed the school choice bill there. And literally from her lips to God's ears, Carrie McDonald, who's a big school choice evangelist, said at a meeting I was at, Iowa just passed the school choice bill. It's so exciting. Unfortunately, it's almost impossible to start a private school in Iowa because of so much red tape. And I always thought the conservative answer to creating competition was cutting red tape, not subsidizing a system that can't even grow. And so,
That's so well said. We're going to have a little time for everyone to kind of come in and maybe ask some questions. But I did just see one hand, and I wanted to give our good friend Alive Athena the chance to say something. If you had something you wanted to add real quick here.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having the space. And I wanted to pick up on something that Robert was talking about, although it wasn't, highlighted as such, and that is how much more politics this brings into education. So I think we've talked about free markets and how this isn't that. We've talked about competition, how it isn't that. We talked about how it's supposed to, be budget neutral. We know it isn't. But there were a couple of things he mentioned about how they're going to double fund, or in some states they're now, talking about how they have to make sure that they, shore up their budgets, whether they say double funding or not. We're probably going to get there. And all of these things will be talking points for elections. All that school choice is doing is rescuing public schools and rescuing government education from their myriad failures, and rescuing politicians from like losing this as an issue. This is fodder. So why anyone would want to invite more politics into the system is beyond my comprehension, because the kids always lose in that equation. The kids are already dead last on the priority list. And now we're giving politicians and unions and teachers and every other stakeholder known to man more opportunities, more things to bicker about, more things to tinker with, and say this needs to be more or less or whatever. And when are we going to get back to the actual education? Well, we aren't, because we shouldn't be doing it. I made a video yesterday, probably pissed off a lot of people. I was very upfront. I said Trump's education plan is hot garbage. I was a little out there, but I was responding specifically to the video he made where he starts getting into the federal government incentivizing, hello, that's money, things that are not in the federal purview. Teacher certification, we're trying to get rid of that. Merit pay for teachers and all this. We're trying to get the government out of the winners and losers and picking and choosing business, because everything they mention, no matter how much we love the outcome of, we want good teachers. Sure, we all do. So what we have to think about when we get in these conversations about school choice is we have to quickly move people away from outcomes. And they love to talk about outcomes. Well, outcomes based, don't get caught in the trap, because chances are we all want similar outcomes, or at least claim to. They claim to, but they don't do anything to get there. So we have to move away from that and get them to admit that they're really fixated on the means. They're fixated on a specific means to allegedly achieve, that is, certain outcomes. We have to get them back to why these means. When we know homeschooling is superior to achieving those outcomes by every metric you could ever look at. So why would you want to take more power away from parents and put more power in the government and put more politics back into education as a means of achieving outcomes that you have never been able to achieve and in fact have demonstrably been unable to achieve?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
with
that's
that,
exactly
I will
right. I
turn it
mean,
over.
I say that adds the basic point of, you're saying what gets back into the hands of us. And I think, and this is kind of an important point that I'd like to make. There may be many people who are using ESAs or vouchers or school choice funding for the sake of what they're doing with their own children at this moment. But the point is that money in your hand is not as important as the decision making. To decide what exactly is going to be happening with your children and how that's going to be successful is way more valuable than the money that could be given to the school that is going to receive it on behalf of your child, when it's not in your hands to then decide exactly how the success of that child is going to be measured, how it's going to be achieved. All of that is exactly what you just said. It's really such a good point.
And the other thing that I was talking about the other day is, what are we going to sacrifice for these few coins that we're going to get back from the government? And clearly, we have, the state saying, okay, we're going to give you, $7,000 or $8,000, whatever, to do, your homeschooling. But by the way, you're going to have to have wellness checks. You're going to have someone come in to assess your homeschooling. Oh, by the way, the state just came out with this new approved curriculum, and you're going to have to use it now. These things are actually being talked about, and it's very important to have your ear to the ground to find out what your state legislature is trying to do, because the thing is it's either the freedom or it's the government, and we can't basically ransom our children in our rights as parents, to the government. It's ludicrous.
Yeah, I'd like
That's
to
exactly
point
right.
out Virginia, which is a purple state, leans blue. Each state has different homeschooling laws. In Virginia, you're allowed to homeschool for religious reasons. So if you don't want to send your kid to public school, there's a number of reasons you can put on your paperwork to take them out. And one of them is you want to give them religious instruction. And obviously the schools aren't allowed to do that. Well, it just passed out of committee, I believe, on Monday to make it remove that option. So it would be illegal to remove your kids from public school to give them religious instruction in the state of Virginia. And so imagine, a couple years ago, Glenn Youngkin tried to pass school choice. Imagine your Christian school has become dependent on this money from the state, and then the state legislator, goes from red to blue, and they say, okay, you're not allowed to teach anything Christian anymore because you're getting government money, and it's it's against our rules. And it's not a hypothetical question. I mean, they're literally trying to outlaw homeschooling for religious reasons right now in the state of Virginia. And so, I remember when Colorado was a red state. People might be old enough to remember when California was a red state. And so we shouldn't tie our children's future to the whims of elected officials. And we shouldn't have to beg every 2 years at the Capitol to give us a little more, master, right? We should be free people, not dependent on the government. And but that is actually their plan, is to get all of you dependent on it. I was at a conservative secret squirrel group that we're members of, and they were pushing school choice. I would say about 60% of the people at our group were for it, 30% were kind of against it or neutral. And literally, the lady from the stage that was pushing it, a guy was saying, "Hey, I'm thinking about starting a private school in the state that just passes school choice dollars, but what happens if they, pull the funding in a couple years? Do you have
Bingo.
any thoughts on like what to do? Like, how do I set up my business structure so that if they pull the funding, that my school still operates, that I don't have to fire all the teachers and file bankruptcy or foreclose on the property that we're purchasing, et cetera, et cetera." And from her lips to God's ear, she goes, "Well, what we need to do is just get so many people in the program that it becomes politically impossible for future legislators to overturn it." And if you can look at our $36 trillion of federal debt, you can look at every single austerity fight, in any single state, in our federal government, overseas government. What's the issue? People become dependent on the government money. Governments can't fund it anymore without increasing taxes, but they can't cut programs because of the dependency. And then, little Johnny won't get his education, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's not a system that's going to free anyone. The intention of these framers is to make people dependent on it. And think about this too, is like right now, I mean, I know the prices vary because whenever you put a number on X, people always complain, but typically a person spending $900 to $1,000 a year homeschooling. Imagine that every single person gets $7,000. It sounds great until you realize that no one in the world in the United States will think that you can educate a child for less than $7,000 a year. I mean, we put them to
Good point.
shame right now. The fact that a homeschool parent can educate their kid for less than $1,000 per year, and their kid is going to be, 30 points higher standard on these standardized tests that homeschoolers don't even study for, or even prep for. We just roll out of bed in the morning and take while everyone else is spending months preparing for, is a shame on them. And so if they can start having us take the money, then that gap, significantly declines. And again, like what we're seeing in Arizona is they have a curriculum that they're passing out in the homeschool groups where these homeschool moms can get a $1,200 Frappuccino machine and use it for a unit study, and the state's going to pay for it. And so people are like, well, I'd rather the homeschool parents had that money than the state has it. But here's the thing, they increased the amount of money they're spending in their state, in their public school education or too. So it's not an either or, it's always an and. And that's because these programs are so unpopular, they have to bribe the politicians to pass them so that they have coverage back in their home districts. So
it's also a little nefarious. It's also a little nefarious because what's happening in the actual free market of homeschooling is an emerging market, and it's slated to be a $10 billion industry by 2029. So that means new entrepreneurs, new services, new resources, all coming about. And then then the state says, no, we're going to redefine, the baseline of what things cost, like you said.
Also, you're right, Jonathan. Another like kind of nuance of that is, I'm in Florida, so in Florida, what's going on right now is people are getting those homeschool dollars, the PEP scholarship funds, and it's driving up the cost of co-ops. Co-ops are charging like double the price for classes that they were charging before. And in counties that were previously thriving, people are like almost forced to get the scholarships if they want their kids to continue to go to those classes, because they're becoming unaffordable.
Alexander, you've got your hand up. You can go right ahead if you wanted to say something more.
Well, yeah, picking up on what Bowtie said and what Robert said is that, we've seen this movie before. They federalized student loans. What happened? We've seen it with Obamacare. You can keep your doctor. Oh, you can keep your curriculum, right? And so anything that the government subsidizes becomes more expensive. It seems counterintuitive to a lot of people who haven't really thought about it, but it happens 100% of the time. There's not a single example of this so-called incrementalism that has reduced prices. So that's just on the money side. And then, of course, the double funding and so on in the politics, but also this making people dependent. Have people already forgotten the Department of Education and what it has done to the states? They existed for how long? Until, I mean, I was 10 years old when that thing came into existence, or almost 11. And, you know, the country, somehow we put men on the moon, we fought wars, we did all kinds of things without the Department of Education. Yes, there was the Education Trust and other stuff, but we increased the amount of money that states are now dependent on, such that governors, even red state governors, are loath to turn it away, even though it comes with all kinds of strings attached. It's not just, oh, we just want to help you out. We want to help you out with your public option states. Here you go, here's some money. No, every single time, every single administration. It's not party specific either. No Child Left Behind was a disaster. Okay. Even Bush's program, every single program has made it exponentially worse. And yet, because things get worse, then they think they need more money. And this is why we're stuck with this department. And I fear that for all the talk about getting rid of it, we're not going to be able to get rid of it, because the governors are probably gnashing their teeth and pulling out their hair, because they don't want to have to go back to their states and come up with a way to make up for this, quote, lost money, which never should have been counted on in the first place. But just like that money, the school choice money, people will count on it to start businesses. They'll count on it to make educational decisions for their children. And yes, it will be the political football of the 21st century that will make the others pale by comparison. We spend $1 trillion on education in America. Imagine what it will be in 10 years with everybody dependent on universal basic education income.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out real quick,
Go ahead.
Just real quick. I know I've been dominating the conversation. Sorry. Remember COVID? It wasn't that far ago. The red state governors did the same, masking, COVID vax, all that stuff in the public schools. Now, if the private schools had been taking public money at that time, there would have been nowhere to run, because they would have had to comply with the same rules the public schools were taking. So at least homeschoolers and private schools, there was a place to run to. There will be no place to run to once the government has their strings on all of us. So sorry, go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, it's the UNESCO plan is, and it's written into their plan for education, is that education should be free and compulsory. And so that's really the key. And when you say compulsory, that means government schools. It should be universally free and compulsory. And if anything that sounded bad, that sounds bad to me, because okay, free sounds good. Oh, and universal, that sounds good. But compulsory, okay, that's maybe something I want to think about, especially since the compulsion is the state, and the state gets to make all the rules. And so that's the problem. See, the family is the center of civilization, not the state. But we've lost that knowledge, that mindset, where we have assumed that the state is our nanny and it'll take care of us, and it's has our best interests at heart, and all of these things. And it's absolutely a mind virus that we accept in a lot of ways. I mean, there's people who say, oh, I don't have a problem paying property taxes, because it's for the roads, it's for the police, it's for all this other stuff. It's like, wait, you've never heard of municipal sales tax? I mean, there's of course I have to, blame public school, because they don't teach the structure of local government in school. So anyway, that's my little soapbox on that.
Nikki, did you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you. I'm in Texas, and we've had complete homeschool freedom here since 1994. There are no requirements. And so when the new COVID homeschoolers come on the scene hoping for a check and saying, it's okay if they want to tell us what curriculum to choose from, or count our days. What they don't understand is they've not lived a life where you never had to do that, which is what we've been doing all these years. When they came out of the public school system, they're basically trading one form of oversight for another, and they're okay with that. And it's really hard to get that absolute freedom across to new homeschoolers, especially. I don't know any veteran homeschoolers who are for vouchers in any form. And I don't know, probably a lot of you have seen that Texas is now proposing $1 billion in the upcoming budget for the proposed ESAs. So it's not even passed, but they've already decided to budget $1 billion for something that was supposed to come from, the tax dollars that we're already paying. It's outrageous. It's insane. And conservatives can't defend it, and they don't even try anymore.
Nikki, I actually was homeschooled in Texas, and my parents knew the lawyers that had fought that battle.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents are staunchly against that whole
Mm-hmm.
thing in Texas. I have a theory, though. I think they're going after Texas so hard because it was the first place to really open up the legalization of homeschooling without any oversight at
Mm-hmm.
all. I think that's why they want to get oversight specifically in Texas.
That's very possible. I was also homeschooled in Texas. We started in 1983, before it was legal. And I
We were
heard you say the 80s also, so you were
at
doing it before it was legal?
85. Yeah,
Okay.
where it was legal. Yep. And we remember, and that's why they're so against it. That's why our parents are so
Yes,
against it, because they remember the battles that were fought, and they're not giving up that territory again.
exactly.
I think that's something.
Go ahead,
jump in.
Rob. Well, I'm a Texan as well. I mean, even though I'm relocated up here in Washington State, I remember the Robin Hood plan, if that sounds a bell, rings a bell, where they take money from rich districts and give it to poor districts. And then, of course, when Texas got the lottery, it says, oh, this money is going to go for education. Do you recall all that? I mean, it's ridiculous. I didn't believe it then when that happened. And even, the Texas Magazine, they did a big expose back in the 90s about how, the powers that be lied to them about the funds from the lotteries. And it was a big debacle. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't know that homeschooling wasn't legalized in every single state until like 1993. I just had Jim Mason on. We recorded a podcast. We're doing a podcast series, 6 in a row during school choice week, the 26th through the 1st. He's going to be the last one. But there was actually a state that he said they won a battle just last year where they finally officially made it legal in that state, although no one had tried to implement it in decades. But yeah, I mean, families growing up, I started, homeschooling in the mid 80s. They were arrested. They were threatened with jail time. They were threatened with their kids being taken from them. And this was in the United States, less than 40 years ago. So this isn't this isn't something that's just been legal and been cool for, all their lives. And they've been trying to get us back in their purview, and giving us money, bribing us is the best way they figured out to do it, because we've refused to bend the knee. But a lot of people are going to hear that song of free money and forget that there's no such thing.
Yeah, 100%. You and Nikki probably remember hiding in the house and being sure that we didn't go outside at the wrong time of the day. And and like anytime there was any kind of anything homeschooling wise, we were very careful about when we went out, what we did, and then if they wanted to try to get any kind of control, it wasn't they couldn't be heavy-handed. The government couldn't be heavy-handed because they had let the genie out of the bottle once they legalized homeschooling. And homeschoolers have been really good about defending that line, for lack of a better better way to put it. But our parents have been very good about defending that line and making sure that we don't give the government an inch lest they take a mile. And it's actually super disheartening to see the COVID homeschoolers that are so eager to accept the handouts and everything, and so eager to I don't blame them. I honestly don't. They just haven't been down this road long enough, and they just don't understand. I mean, and when you've just lost an income because you want to stay home with your kids, I mean, it's a lot of money, and it's a lot of sacrifice if you don't take it. And I mean, I completely get it.
I think both Nikki and Al, Athena, y'all have thrown your hands up. One of you wanted to bring up whatever you had.
I was just going to agree with you, Bowtie, that there were many, many years where we did not go out in public during school hours. The very first year we homeschooled was in Oklahoma, which, as many of you know, has always had homeschooling guaranteed in their constitution. But the very first, I think that within the first 2 weeks of our homeschooling, my parents were arrested. And I was 11 years old. And you don't forget that. They were thankfully released by the end of that day. Before homeschool legal defense was actually a thing, some of the lawyers who eventually formed that got wind very quickly of their arrest that day, and they were let go and the charges were dropped the following year. But you never forget that, and I don't know how to get that across to people that this is a new freedom, and it needs to be protected.
I was just going to add that, sometimes I get my tinfoil hat on a little too tightly, but I couldn't shake the feeling during COVID that the one of the aims was to get people so frustrated that they started, looking for other avenues and looking for other things to do to swell the ranks of so-called homeschoolers. First of all, it was the speed with which even public officials referred to what parents were doing as homeschooling when they were just virtual schooling. And I found that very odd. Or parents that would walk around saying, well, I'm homeschooling now. And I'm like, no, you're not. That's virtual school. Like, you're in the school, but you're at home. That's not homeschooling. And they were conflating the two terms. I still meet people to this day. People will talk to me and say, oh, I want to homeschool. But what they're really saying is I'm doing K-12 at home, on the computer, but through the school district. And I have to tell them, and I hate to sound like some kind of snob or gatekeeper, that is not what homeschooling is. They are virtual schooling. I'm like, well, what's the difference? But my point is, by conflating that and getting people to think that, well, I can keep my kids safe from whatever it is, bullying, school shootings, whatever, pick your poison, lousy meals at school, whatever, then I can, I can just do that and stay home and get this money. And we've seen what happens to people, how things change when the set of early adopters who have to do it on their own, whether it's immigrate to the country or be a homeschooler, you fundamentally get a different kind of person. The kind of person is I'm doing this on my own. I'm out. I got to take care of my own kids, etc. Has a mindset, has an approach to this and a philosophy of education that is just fundamentally different. And this is what they were talking about at that squirrel thing that Robert was talking about. If you get enough people attached to the money, it becomes politically impossible to get rid of it. But it's not just the numbers. It's the numbers of the kind of people who will get attached to the money. You can start a school today without the public funding. You can homeschool today. We have choice now. But the kind of person who says, I need, is just a fundamentally different person. Their character is different. And I know that sounds terribly judgmental, but I'm just making an observation of reality. Anyone can change. Anyone can wake up one day and say, I'm going to be a different kind of person. I'm going to take charge of this. And I think it was either Isabel Patterson or Rose Wilder Lane who said that liberty is the tyranny of personal responsibility. And, I don't see it as tyranny, but I think a lot of people do. And I think that's what they're aiming for, is they're aiming to get more of those people doing what they call homeschooling, and then they can justify all manner of things that affect the rest of us.
Robert, did you wanted to add a couple of things? I know you've been, we just want to take care of everyone's time. Was there anything you wanted to add? Any particular buzzwords as well about school choice that we hadn't touched yet so far?
No, I mean, I think this has been a great conversation, and there's of course so much more that we can talk about, but I think ultimately it's, who's responsible for the kids. Is it parents or the government? And right now, yeah, there's a public option that you can opt into, but parents still have the ability to say, hey, I want to do this on my own. I'm going to take the responsibility myself. Our church is going to give scholarships out. Our business is going to donate to this nonprofit charity, or we're going to help build a private school with our own money, and we're going to, control the curriculum. Those options are there now, and people have been doing it. I know people of all socioeconomical backgrounds that figure out how to homeschool. But this fundamentally says that unless the government is going to help you out, you can't do it on your own. That you are required, the government is required in this relationship. And, as a Christian, there's actually 0 Bible verses that support civil government in education. It's almost exclusively given to parents as the responsibility. And the only 2 really mentions of civil government is in the Old Testament, when the Jews were taken to Babylon, or the Jews were taken to Egypt, or in Egypt too long, and the government was using the education system to brainwash them to think like Egyptians or think like Babylonians. And the reason Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are known, because those were the 4 out of hundreds of thousands of students that actually didn't get sucked into that woke mind virus that they had back then. And so ultimately, it's as Patrick Henry said, give me liberty or give me death. Now we're exchanging our liberty for a few dollars, but those dollars aren't going to go very far for very long, as people start charging more money. We have 100,000 students annually at Classical Conversations. If every single state gave homeschoolers $7,000, we could make our curriculum, instead of being $700 to $1,500 a year to join, depending on what grade you're in, we could make it $7,000 a year and call it free. And instead of being a successful kind of big small business or mid-sized business, we could be a $700 million company overnight. So I'm kind of a dumb businessman not taking this money and running, but we have to have a line in the sand on our morals and in our view of what is government's role, and are we willing to be bribed and enrich ourselves to do that. And ultimately, it is the service providers that are going to get rich off this. I mean, communist China, through a Hong Kong subsidiary, once Florida passed their school choice bill, they bought IMG Academy, the biggest sports academy, biggest private school, I believe, in Florida and maybe in the United States. Now, the Florida legislators, I think, stepped in and blocked that sale. But don't be surprised when Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and George Soros start buying up all of these private schools in the future and using it to implement their worldview. So ultimately, it's if we want to be a free people and we want our grandchildren to be free, we have to make this stand now. I really do think if we lose this battle, not that there's not other fights to come back from, but it could be the straw that breaks the republic's back, when every single person is reliant on the government for their education. everyone will be taught that the government is the only way to educate people. And that is really part of the woke mind virus. And that's the most scary part of all this in my book. So this is the fight to have liberty in our generation and for our future, for our kids. And thankfully, most of the states have excluded homeschoolers from this school choice boondoggle. But I know Texas is one of them. I know Florida has it. Arizona has it. That some of the states haven't done that. And so ultimately, they're going to use that to claw back those freedoms that we have and make us all make the decision whether we're going to bend the knee or lose our children. So I don't want to get to that point.
And the solution to government is not more government. Clearly, that's true. And so I've always advocated for a separation between education and the state, a new disestablishment clause, so that we can educate our children accordingly. I mean, of course, schools will exist in some form. But we have a lot of people that have a lot of brain power to create solutions, and the solution to our problems is not more government, more control over our lives. We need to have control over ourselves and our children and our family, and sometimes that requires us to make hard decisions and sacrifice a little bit of convenience for things. I mean, we help people look at their finances to see if they can homeschool, and a lot of times they realize that their fears about losing an income is unfounded, and so or they decide, well, I can't do it this year, but I can make these changes to make it next year. And these are real world solutions. I mean, we do a full cost benefit analysis and look at all those aspects of how much money we save, how much money it's going to cost, all those things. And a lot of people are not ready to do that. Do you have some?
Yeah, not only that, but the homeschooling community has gone so far ahead. Not like you guys in the 80s, but now it's like booming. And so when you say you homeschool, you shouldn't be feeling like you're on your own anymore. It's like there's other groups, there's many other families, there's many activities, there's co-ops and things like this. It's like you're not alone anymore. This. There's veteran homeschoolers that are there to support, and they're willing to show you the way and give you shortcuts to all the lessons that we learn from being the first time doing it. But yeah, that's it. It's, you're not alone. You got other people.
Yep.
Just want to give a big thanks also to Robert Bortins at the Robert B. Show with Classical Conversations. I think he needed to dip out. We just really appreciate your time. Want to say thanks, everybody. Follow him and check him out.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And like I said, I got a big school choice series next week that will be dropping. So please tune into those and share them. I really do think this is the fight that we gotta win. And hey, I'll let y'all know something, because I know a lot of you guys are the warriors here. There's a lot of people that agree with me. Is we are making a positive difference. I had a friend at a school choice conference. He called me yesterday, in fact, and he's like, "Hey, Robert, you are the topic of conversation around the bar after the conference," and they're saying how these people on X, and mentioned myself, were embarrassing them because we kept taking them to the mat on the fact that these things aren't that they're breaking their own core values. And a couple of them said, "Oh, I wish those homeschoolers would just get on board with this school choice. It'd make it so much easier." And one of the guys, who I guess is a little bit more insightful, is like, "I don't." I was like, "Because if Robert and these people are right, then in 20 years after we've ruined private education, we need to come to get them and figure out how to fix it." And so there are people I mean, there are people at the top of every single chain who know y'all's names, who are on X, and we are making a difference inside these conversations that they're having, because we're forcing them to look in the mirror. And so, I mean, I think, like I said, worst case scenario, 20 years from now, they'll look back and say, I wish we had listened, to Nikki and to, all of these people that are on this, Sean, and all these people that are trying to warn them, because it's not, it's a wound of a friend, really. I'm saying, wake up, stop betraying your core values. This is not a solution that you would pick for healthcare or housing or, low income families. Why are you doing this for education? You are betraying yourself. And so just thank you all for being on tonight. And yeah, I do got to go. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert.
No one wants to be Cassandra, but no one wants to let that Trojan horse in either. So we got to figure out how to make that work. That's such a good point, Robert. Your Majesty, maybe we're going to probably move to a little bit of a closing. Do you have any closing remarks or thoughts you wanted to add or question?
No, I don't. I'm enjoying it. So, do you, Jonathan?
Oh, I'm good. If anyone has a question, a quick question, I can answer it.
Yeah, good. I think we are going to go to some questions. We'll probably be bringing up anyone who wanted to pop up on the speaker dais real quick and ask a question or two to Her Majesty, myself, or Homeschool LLC, the Prescotts. Just a little tooting our own horn here, a little toot toot. But Bowtie Queen Bee and your Uncle Owl, actually, we will be beginning a podcast series starting next week. We've recorded some of our spaces, and we're going to get some more conversations about some of these specific questions coming soon with our great new friend, the Sober Dad podcast, who is sitting at like 700 something, 7 days, totally sober. Amazing for that. Just wanted to give him a big shout out. He may be putting his kids down. Maybe he can't pop in and say hi, but if he can just hop in whenever he gets a chance to. And so we're going to be beginning that next week, along with our weekly Wednesday night spaces. Of course, we're going to keep doing that. And on top of that, I had an additional question. It's kind of going to sound like a really philosophical question, but it's kind of like in the name of what we're talking about with this school choice question. We've been saying it this whole time, but it's good to be really specific. It didn't matter what the name was. So the Department of Education, the what was called the Robin Hood, in a bad way, the Robin Hood decision in Texas, no child left behind. All of this is just another name for the government trying to come in with a decision to figure out how to fix education that it's already had in its own responsibility now for half a century. And we have the results. The results are in about whether or not that works. So it doesn't matter what they name it. It doesn't matter how much money is involved. It's just a repackaging to get everyone excited about making the exact same decision we've been making for half a century. And again, like I say, the data's in. How's it going? And the answer is it's absolutely abysmal. And anyone who says otherwise is really not thinking clearly. The people that I know that are successful through the federal system are successful in spite of it, not because of it. And so it's just something I wanted to just pose as a question. I think we've already sort of discussed it, but to the Prescotts and to Al of Athena, Your Majesty, of course, it's like we're describing this specific school choice discussion, this specific example. But really, we're trying to put everyone's decisions about what to do with their family and their children and the education back in their own hands. Now, that comes with a big cost. That comes with a lot of unknowns. And I think it's right for people to be concerned. Okay, so what does that mean and how's that going to look? And the point is that's going to present its own suite of problems that we in many ways are not prepared for, and we're going to need to scramble around and figure out. But
that's versus not addressing the current situation, which we don't know what to do about that either, because it shouldn't have ever been put in place in the first place. And it's important to not to stop the discussion specifically about school choice, but to say that really we're aiming at something a little bit more integral, more crucial, when we're saying that it's not just that school choice is a bad idea, and so hey, we have this other alternative and we should be voting for that instead. It's We shouldn't be having this conversation as this is what we should be doing. This is what the government should be deciding. This is the choice we're making at the level of government, instead of what's the choice being made at the level of each family, each parents with their own children. Al, you're of Athena, your hand is up. You go right ahead.
So that's an interesting question that you pose. Obviously, it's the one we get most often. Well, what's your solution? Um, and another one I get is, well, every other country has, doesn't have homeschooling, and they have, mandatory this and they do great. And I'm like, well, first of all, that's false. That might be your impression, but it's not factually accurate. They have a very much more entrenched class system. Pretty much every Western European country does too. They just watch too much television and they think every place is like here, and it isn't. But what I would say is that we do have examples in American history of deregulation, or with the government finally getting out of picking winners and losers. And the most notable one I can think of off the top of my head, it's not truly analogous, but it might help people get there, is I'm old enough to remember Ma Bell. I'm old enough to remember when people thought the breaking up of Ma Bell was going to mean we couldn't communicate with each other. Like, how in the world are we going to make a phone call without, one ginormous company making everything work? They didn't know that lying in wait, just ready to jump in and make it all happen virtually overnight, were all these fledgling little long distance company. I mean, how fast did that happen? Do you guys remember? Anybody else here as old as I am, as old as dirt? But it was so fast, so fast. I remember both. I was old enough to remember it breaking up and some angst and anxiety of people around me, adults around me. And then I also am old enough to remember the plethora of choices that seemed to erupt overnight in terms of both long distance carriers and different options. I mean, I remember got my first apartment and I had to choose a long distance company, and it was like, oh my God, how do I choose? And there were so many different MCI and this one and that one, the other one. And what happened? Everything got cheaper. And we're now to the point where what used to cost you, like, I don't know, can I call grandma or do I need to save up? It's now like I can sit at my cell phone and talk to Europe. It's not going to cost me, the same amount. We pay differently. Some people say, well, no, you're on the hook and you rent the phone, but that's a whole separate conversation. But if we're talking about getting the job done, the free market, the private sector consistently does a better job when they're free to do so. I think it's a matter of really believing in America, American ingenuity. What makes us special and different from our European cousins, and certainly from Asia and other countries, is that that's what set us apart. That's what built America to be what we are, or at least were, is that there was a vacuum, somebody filled it. There was a market, in came the innovators. So I actually try to talk to people in terms of passion and excitement to get them thinking about the possibilities. I don't have a solution, but can tell you that in such a period of chaos that you might describe, will come enormous creativity immediately filled by homeschool companies that exist now, that are creating curriculum, that are doing consulting, that are forming co-ops. They will be first on the scene because they've been there and they know how to do it. They're this sort of elder statesman of the whole thing. And then from them and their students will come many more ideas. And just like telecom and just like electronics and just like some of these things just exploded, innovated, and became amazing and cheaper and job creating, so will education be. I have a tremendous amount of optimism about it if we can get people to stop being so pessimistic about themselves and having so little faith in their own abilities as parents to do this job, and just recognize that the government does it poorly. That's why you're running away. You got this.
I actually loved what you said about the phrase was lying in wait. Once the decision was made to break that apart, what was lying just beneath the surface, just behind that decision, was a whole Niagara Falls of teams and people and resources. And I want to just say what's so funny is where you ended there is those resources are going to be parents, it's going to be moms, it's going to be groups of moms who in their own eyes do not think of themselves as being qualified whatsoever to take the mantle of handling this. And the truth is they will do far and above so much a better job than what is being done in the government schools that you won't even believe how much better it is. You will not recognize the success of that, and it will be accomplished by a bunch of moms and pops and little beans, little nothings, people who look at the whole system and rightly think, well, this is a gargantuan thing that I could never handle. And that's right. No one should be. Your own capacity and resources to do this, even amongst families, and I'm thinking of one right now in my head, and I'm just not going to say who they are for their own sake. But it's like this mom and dad do not seem like the kind of people who would be able to completely take care of their own children, their own education of their children, and yet they're doing phenomenally better than whatever their children were doing the year before. And it, like, they themselves realize and admit and have to look themselves in the mirror and say, wow, so all those things that I was worried about not only weren't a problem, it was an anti-truth. What I had to offer was significantly better than what they were getting before. And we have two people with their hands up. I'm going to let Jessica Ann chat in just a moment. But Sober Dad podcast, I did actually want you to get a chance to come in here and speak if you have something to say real quick. And then, Jessica, I'll get to your question.
Hey, thanks. I just wanted to say thank you for the space for first of all, and then yeah, I full-time Dadify, part-time podcaster, new to homeschooling, and I found Queen and Uncle Al in oh, Her Majesty, sorry, and Uncle Al in the spaces, and I asked them if they had a podcast. They said no, and I dabble in podcasting, so I offered my services, and yeah, I'm excited. They'll be doing the majority, if not all, the talking. I'm just there to facilitate because I want to learn as much as everybody else, and I'm looking forward to it. And these spaces are normally at 7 p.m. Eastern, by the way, every Wednesday. We'd like to see you guys here. There's quite a few people in this space. And yeah, that's all I got. Have a good night.
So awesome. Thank you so much. Jessica and Bogart, please hop in. You had a question or something you wanted to say? Please do.
Hey guys, can you hear me okay?
Sounds great.
Good. I just wanted to jump in. I've been homeschooling my children for 5+ years now. My one daughter is going to be graduating this year. My son is a teenager and, well ahead in terms of his age versus the grade, right? But as per, some of my two favorite people there with homeschool life, the focus again is on teaching to mastery. And one of the things that I was involved in, and this is how I got into this homeschool group, was through this startup that I helped create, which was Synthesis School. And to your point, where did she go? Is it Owl? I think it was Owl who was talking about this, about Ma Bell. And then breaking up and then having all these innovators come into a space and like, hey, we can do this. We can make this better, even though we're not professionals, quote unquote. And then, you start to kind of trailblaze in some of these areas and you create products that are way better than anything they're going to get in the system. So it's yeah, I mean, just be brave,
Boom.
And that's it. That's really it. Okay, that's all.
That was awesome.
Hey,
Wonderful.
Jessica, that's super cool. We actually, in one of our spaces, and it's been a few months back, but we actually had Chris and Frank on, and he was talking about synthesis, and it's I think you're super right. Um, the beauty of having a decentralized education is that you get innovators that can do, I mean, you get obviously like synthesis and really cool stuff like that. But even in the 80s, you weren't allowed to buy curriculum, and people probably don't remember that, but my parents weren't allowed to buy curriculum from like a curriculum store because they weren't teachers. So people were making up their own curriculum, and they were making unit studies and all these like fascinating ways for people to learn. And it's too bad Robert's not in here, because that's how classical conversations came about. There's so many like entrepreneurial ways, and it just opens the world up to not have government over with all their regulations and all their little things that they want to do to squelch any kind of creativity in the area. The beauty of all of this is of the free market is innovation. So yeah, you're right. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, it was really amazing because I started with synthesis in the fall of 2020, and I was wearing all kinds of different hats. I mean, I was trying to get Chrisman on podcasts. I was also doing some like online coaching. And what was, hilarious and awesome about it was when I applied, for the opportunity to work with them, they're, was like, oh, you're a veteran from the entertainment industry without an educational background, but you've got all this crazy life experience, and yeah, you're in. You're like, and the question was, do you have any formal training in the space of educating? And no. And they're like, great, perfect. And that was it. And I was like, yes, this is how we do. So, for all those out there who are like, oh man, I'm not a teacher, it's okay. As someone with a 20-year voiceover career, I'm telling you, you all can do this.
Yeah,
Awesome.
my parents, my dad is an engineer, but my mom was the one that mostly taught us, and we were pretty much unschooled. And if you get a chance, go up on my profile. I have a pinned thread, and my brother's story is on there. But basically, he was self-taught in math, and he ended up with as self-taught in math because my dad is good at math, and he has a fascinating way of teaching us math. But my brother wasn't interested, and then when he finally got interested, he just went through all of it all at once in high school, and then decided in college that that's what he wanted to do. So his undergrad was in math and physics both, and then NASA paid for his graduate degree. And that was all self-directed learning. So with my mom teaching him, and my mom she barely knows math. I think she did take calculus in high school, but she didn't remember it, and she didn't teach it to my brother by any stretch. So yeah, when people say, oh, I can't teach, I don't know enough, well, you don't have to.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I mean, I was working with my son this year on trigonometry, and you kind of authentically bash through some of these concepts together. And you've got to find the will and the interest in it, which then permeates into your home around that subject. Like to actually collectively nerd out, about what it is that you're learning. I think that's so valuable, because then it gets all over everybody else. And then suddenly everyone's really excited about it. And it's no longer this like, oh man, we gotta get through this, right? And that's not how we learn. We all know that. So anyway, nerd out. That's my hashtag.
I was going to add something to that. Instead of thinking ourselves as teachers, because instead of doing that, because when we say teachers, we know we immediately start imagining the teachers at school, right? So we really don't want to be that. What you really want to be is guides and mentors. That's what we are for our kids. We are teaching them not academics, not that. We're teaching them how to live and navigate through life. That's really what it's all about. And through that process, you're teaching them, again, I use teaching, you're mentoring, you're guiding them how to do their own research. How do you look for knowledge? How do you satisfy your preferences and your interests? And once they learn how to navigate, they will be able to find out what they're really into, what they want to be good at. And that's basically what you do.
Yeah, I mean, you can't be a central planner to your children. I mean, in a lot of ways, you're guiding them, and on our mission statement on our our profile, we say that our priority is facilitating the parent-child relationship and building close bonds through a peaceful environment that promotes trust and mentoring. That's really our goal is for families to connect with their children, because the learning is going to happen, and the learning is going to happen because your children have a brain, and most people don't realize that children have brains, especially teachers. And so, and I say that tongue in cheek, but really a lot of the questions we get is, how are they going to learn if they don't have a teacher? And it floors me to realize that they don't realize their children can learn.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot, I mean, heck, when I was in high school, the person teaching, the teacher I had for algebra was the football coach. It's like, okay, they're not a subject matter expert. So the thing is there's really nothing hard about this.
It shouldn't be intimidating.
No, it's not. It shouldn't be intimidating. And the thing is you've already gone through the school system. Of course you can teach it. You just may have to, relearn some things, but it's still possible.
Yeah, but you want to do it in such a way that you're helping your kids learn how to have a good time while learning.
Exactly.
Not to have a terrible time, because if you have a terrible time doing anything, you really are discouraged to want to do that altogether.
And we talk about this in depth in our book about the keys to motivation and stuff like this, and it's not what you think.
No.
So you should, we do have the audio version for drive time. We have the hardbound version, the Kindle version, softbound. And it really, go ahead and get that. Even if you don't agree with everything we say, it's really a good read.
Absolutely true. I honestly, I feel like we could do this for hours, but I believe it's really right to just take care of everyone's time. I think we've covered the point so well. I've got a little classic way of ending out almost all of these conversations, because it seems to say nearly the same thing every time, which is what the Prescotts just said was so helpful, is you don't even really have a way to do central planning on your own children. So what on earth makes us think that a government can do central planning on everyone's children? That's just nonsense to assume that. And then the second side is, I think even in the case of working out what's best for the children's success has as much to do with freedom at their level as it does as freedom at the level of the family. So freedom for the parents to decide exactly what's going to happen throughout their child's day is, I don't think people realize the value of that. Like, you actually can't put dollars on that when you can direct what they do each day, what they do for weeks, what they do for months, what they do for years for their education, instead of sending them to the federal penitentiary system. I'm sorry, the box down the street, the government education, every day for 8 hours a day for years. The assumption that's going to be planned out better than what they could be doing at home
is hard to break. I mean, it's hard for us to recognize exactly why that freedom at the level of family, at the level of parents with their children, and really even at the level of the child themselves is much more integral to their education success, the success of them being taught and trained how to think, how to work, how to figure these things out. And so I'm just so impressed by what everyone said. I'm so glad that Robert Bortins was around and the Prescotts. I'm honestly, I'm kind of enjoying being a little bit of an owl snob right here. So you're kind of like three of my favorite owls, like ever, is the Homeschool Life and Owl of Athena. I'm so glad y'all were here. But maybe for the sake of saying it once again, we Queen Bee and I, we do have a weekly space. It's usually at 1900 Eastern time, 7:00. It's not usually at this late. And Homeschool Life LLC, please go check them out. They have an awesome book, Kids Don't Need School. It's also true. They wrote it together about their own experiences, and it is full of great stories, and it's incredible. The Sober Dad podcast, we're going to be hanging out with him quite a bit. Hope to see you all later. I have no problem shilling for anyone. You guys send me all of your homeschool stuff, whatever you guys are up to. I will gladly. We want everyone out here to to get to know each other. We have a lot of amazing people hanging out with us tonight. Owl of Athena, she's one of my favorite. We're word, the meaning of words, definition of terms, combatants out there on X. We like to hold everyone accountable for how they use words. It's one of my favorite things about her. If you want to say something real quick here at the end, you go right ahead. But otherwise, I'm just going to toss it back over to everyone else and Her Majesty to say goodnight to everyone.
No, I'm good. Thank you. And I'm flattered. And yeah, I'm kind of a word nerd. So
Total
that's
word
what I
nerds over
nerd
here.
out on. Yep.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming out. This is super exciting conversation, and I think it needs to happen a lot more often, especially about school choice and maybe talking about alternatives, or I don't know. I think there's a lot of material here that we need to talk about and we need to keep in discussion so that we can be vigilant about holding the line. I'm really excited that you guys all came out. I feel like we're kind of soldiers together in a funny way, holding the line together. And yeah, I hope to see you guys at some more of our Wednesday night spaces. And if you ever have anything you want to DM me about, my DMs are always open. If you have questions for me, I know the same goes for Uncle Owl and probably for most of the people that spoke up here. I don't want to speak for them, but I think that's the case. We love to hear that. We want to make the homeschool, pro homeschool, anti school choice group very big, as big as we can. And yeah, I think that's about it.
Thank you for hosting, both for our co-host and getting Robert and us together. I've been trying to get with him on this topic for a while, and it just seems to just kind of float together. So thank you for having us.
Well,
and I
did try to get Corey, but he was busy at a movie shoot, like you said. So he's got a lot going on.
And the truth is we all do. So to take care of everyone's time, thank you all for hanging out. We will see you all soon. And as Queen Bee said, please do not hesitate to get into our direct messages. Send us a message if you have any questions. We appreciate you all very much. You all take care. Cheers.
Thank you for listening. If you'd like to contact us, please check the show notes and don't forget to subscribe to the show wherever you're listening to this.